Bienvenidos amigas y amigos a un vídeo más del canal de Crónicas de Poniente. Hoy, como veis, probablemente en el vídeo más importante hasta la fecha en mi canal, al menos para mí como fan de la comunidad de Canción de Hielo y Fuego, con unos invitados de lujo, archimaestres, todos de la ciudadela de Antigua. Voy a empezar, si me permitís, por Javi, al cual todos conocéis, y que me va a acompañar en esta entrevista, que gracias a él ha sido posible también hacer esta entrevista, que me va a ayudar un poquito con el inglés, que no lo domino tan bien como él. Javi, que lo conocéis de la página web losisterreinos.com, su canal de YouTube, etcétera, etcétera, y el podcast, la canción continúa. Javi, bienvenido y muchas gracias por estar en esta entrevista.
Nada, muchísimas gracias. Thanks a lot. We are having here Elio and Linda. It's a pleasure that they are with us in this interview. So we will ask them the questions in Spanish that they will answer in English. But no os preocupéis que whatever you speak in English o habléis en español, you are going to understand everything de toda esta entrevista.
Everything, todo. Y los protagonistas, los verdaderos protagonistas de esta entrevista, Elio Garcia y Linda Antonsson. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much. Welcome to Chronicles of Westeros.
Thank you so much for inviting us.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to get this close virtually to Spain. We've loved every time we've been to Spain. We've loved every time we've all our interactions with Spanish fans. And
we've missed it for the last 2 years.
Yep.
So definitely great to join up with you like this.
Muchas gracias por estar aquí. Elio y Linda son probablemente las personas que, son los grandes referentes a nivel mundial de Canción de Hielo y Fuego. Si tenemos a George Martin, pues después de George yo diría que Elio y Linda son las personas que más nos han traído, que han aportado muchísimo a la comunidad gracias a su web westeros.org, pues a la gran Wikipedia que han creado en esta página web, a todos los espacios de consulta, a la ciudadela, entrevistas a George, gracias a la aplicación que tienen para móviles de A World of Ice and Fire. Y pues también indudablemente gracias a ese maravilloso libro que ayudó a toda la comunidad de Canción de Hielo y Fuego a organizar, dar coherencia a toda la historia de Poniente. Ya sabéis, Un Mundo de Hielo y Fuego, que se publicó en 2014, Javi, si no recuerdo mal, fue en 2014, ¿correcto? 2014.
2014, The Wall of Ice and Fire was published in 2014 and El Mundo de Hielo y Fuego fue publicado en español en 2015.
Exactamente. Pues todo este trabajo es de agradecer a Elio y a Linda. A mí me hacía muchísima ilusión que uno de los grandes festejos de llegar a los 100.000 suscriptores fuera entrevistarlos a ellos y pues han tenido a bien hacer esta entrevista. Si os parece, vamos a empezar con la entrevista. I want to start to ask you about your work with George. How is working with him? What's your role in George's creative process?
I would say that the role that we played during the work on the World of Ice and Fire had a lot to do with helping George organize things so that his creative process could then have free range on adding more things. Obviously, as everyone knows by now, it wasn't intended that he would add so much material. But I think that once we had structured the material that existed, it gave him ideas because he saw the bits and pieces where he could flesh things out further. And then he went wild with it and added lots and lots of details. We wish we could have worked more closely, I guess, in some sense, but a lot of the work was done. Obviously, we were just working on our own here, and then there was a lot of sending material back and forth towards the end. Almost the most conversations were about art, weren't they, really?
I think that's true, actually, and a big part of our role with the World of Ice and Fire as well was helping to have input on the art. I remember emails where George was commenting on artwork and then saying, ditto what Elio said, ditto what Elio said, ditto what Elio said. I'm starting to feel like a broken record because ditto what Elio said. So we, I think because of that, I think the editors and the art director and the artists are relying on us more as well to have input and help them find references and make things look as good as they could for that book. So that was a big part of it as well.
Great. You were exactly talking about some of the location, about the arts, and the Wall of Ice and Fire really helped many readers to bring coherence to Westeros history and really allowed us to know more about unknown places such as GT or Sothorios. I remember I was with Elio in the Unseen Westeros exposition in Berlin. It was like 2 years ago, and we were able to see amazing art of those locations like GT or Sothorios or unknown places, no? Talking about those locations of the known wall, maybe not a very popular location of Westeros, but places from far away. Was there a lot of material that couldn't be included in the final version of the Wall of Ice and Fire? Like information about GT or Sothorios or places like that? And if that's the case, do you think that we could access to this information maybe in one of future George project? I don't know, in Fire and Blood second volume or anything?
So, I mean, the main material that George worked on that didn't make it into the Wall of Ice and Fire was, of course, the Targaryen material that became Fire and Blood. But there was information for some of the regions in Essos that we did have to trim for space. I think we cut some of ET a little bit. Some of the Dothraki may have been cut a little bit. But, you know, like I think as we told people, like 90% of the material that you see for Essos in the eastern regions, that was all written by George. We wrote some of the free cities and touched up little bits and pieces here, but for the most part, it was George. And I think mostly it got in there. Just some bits and pieces didn't. And whether those will come out, maybe in the course of A Song of Ice and Fire, somebody will mention something, or it's anyone's guess.
Yeah, I don't think there's enough to fill out.
Yeah, a whole nother
publication. Obviously, there were things cut for Westeros other than the Targaryen material, where we had to trim some of the other histories and regions, like the Ironborn. Yes. Mm-hmm. So there is more material in Westeros, but I think that because he really made up a lot of the things for Essos for the book. Like he was saying, you know, he had put all these places on the map when they asked him to fill out the map.
Like Carcosa, what is in Carcosa? We want to know something about Carcosa.
He put all these places on the map because he realized he had such a blank space on the map when they made it larger for the Lands of Ice and Fire. So he put all these names on, and then, oops, now they want details for all these places for the World of Ice and Fire.
Yeah.
So he had a lot to make up.
Yeah.
A question for the World of Ice and Fire starts with the story of the old world, the Dawn Age and the Age of Heroes. And in 2019, you were enveloped in a project called Bloodmoon, an HBO spin-off based of the Age of Heroes. What's happened with this project to get cancelled? Do you think that it may have included semi-canonical information from the World of Ice and Fire?
We don't really know. We can really only speculate about it.
Yeah, it's it may have had something to do with the fact that the way they ended the Night King storyline in Game of Thrones, that they saw how people reacted to that, and so most likely this was supposed to be a significant part of the plot for Bloodmoon or whatever the project's name was supposed to be in the end. That seems to, it could have been the name, it could have been a code name, but it may have been something like that. They saw that people weren't reacting, but they were reacting badly to the end of Game of Thrones, and then now we are planning to do something about the history of this, and it's going to be just, people are going to feel it's pointless because of the way it ended. It could also be that once they saw some material, they realized that this is too different in some ways, that they obviously would have tried, I think, to make it look a little more dated, a little more maybe not quite managing the Bronze Age that it should be, but still trying to pull it back from the medieval inspired world and going further back, and maybe that didn't work. So it's hard to say.
Also, as to if they had any semi-canonical information, I mean, yes, we consulted on the show, and for just a couple of days of work, basically, we talked with the producers, with Jane Goldman, and He kind of laid out what they wanted us to help them with, and so and that was stuff having to do with what the World of Ice and Fire had revealed about the ancient history, about the North. And I will give you an exclusive. We've never really spoke exactly about what we did, but I've seen other people who've worked on it have felt free to talk about it, because we had an NDA, but I guess the production's done. So specifically what they wanted is they wanted a ancient equivalent of sort of like the painted table on Dragonstone. Where Aegon made his painted table showing all the kingdoms. They seem to have had an idea of having I think they call it the White Table. Is that your recollection?
That might have been it, yeah.
Which was a
made by werewolves, something like that.
I think it was probably a weirwood table that was carved or painted with the kingdoms of the first men in the North.
Wow!
And so they wanted us to help them figure out, okay, what were these kingdoms? Who ruled them? What were their boundaries? And so we
which houses could have been kings in
back
the past?
then, yes.
And so placing out heraldry on the map,
right?
And so on.
So,
for example, no Manderleys, because the Manderleys came from the
exactly no Manderleys. But we, for example, the Blackwoods claimed to have been kings in Wolfswood. So we provided them this whole thing we did of using ancient families that we knew were kings in the past, and trying to create the boundaries, and trying to say, if you do it at this point, you do it at that point. And that was it. We sent that. They sent a few questions about some of the heraldry of the families that we mentioned, and it was that was really the extent of our communication. I think if it had gone further, obviously we probably would have been involved more. But just for the pilot, that's all they really needed our help with.
Wow, that was amazing. We didn't know that information. We know that some people from the project has spoken, like Jane Goldman has said, even Naomi Watts had said some declaration about the pilot. But wow, thanks a lot for sharing this with us. Now that you were talking about it, I would really have loved to watch that TV show. Not what that spin-off was cut. We will never see it, but we may see in the future the spin-off about the Princess Nymeria of Rohan. And it has not been green lighted, but the TV show has already a showrunner, is Amanda Siegel. She's a script writer, and the project seems at least in a good direction. And I remember that before the World of Ice and Fire was released, I remember that you posted in Westeros.org like the exclusive excerpt of 10,000 Ships, if I recall correctly. Yes. Yeah. So I think that you really like this storyline. So what would you like to share about what part of this story may be interesting for the people that hasn't read that story in the books?
I think
we had a little discussion initially, and we realized that we had both assumed two different things about which direction they were going to go in the project, because Elio had assumed that the bulk of it would be about the journey, with them traveling to the different places along the way, and stopping for a few years before they were forced to move on, and that you'd have this very dynamic travel show in a sense, but all these
Thorios, for example, very interesting for
different places.
Summer Isles, seeing the Summer Islanders properly.
So you could certainly highlight a lot of different cultures and make it change the look of the show quite a lot. I had thought that maybe they would spend some time on that and then want to actually bring it to Dorne fairly quickly to follow then the political infighting between the houses in Dorne, because we know that there's lots of that. So it kind of depends how familiar or not they want to make it to viewers of Game of Thrones.
I think that maybe the second option is more likely, because the first option, like visit a lot of places, could be what the TV show about Corlys Velaryon may be treating, because if it's called 9 Trips or something like that, it may be focused more in those locations, in Essos or maybe even Far Essos or Sothorios, and then maybe this show is based on the political struggle, the fight versus Martells versus Ironwood or something like that. Maybe because they have a different TV show about the travels, maybe this one is focused most, like you said, Linda, about the politics.
Well,
I don't know.
Maybe
That's
they
a good
can
point,
introduce the Valyrian folk, for example. Maybe it's a lot of interest to know.
It's a lot of.
I mean,
options.
I think they, regardless of how they do it, they would want to start it by showing somewhat at the very end of the conflict between Rhoynar and Valyria.
Yeah.
You'd want to have that background, maybe with the defeat of Garin the Great, that you open with something like that, and then Nymeria realizing that she has to take her people and flee, and then doing, whether they would do a jump or whether they would shorten the travel and just do some of the highlights. Certainly the fact that they're considering a travel show with Corlys Velaryon, having two shows that have a little bit of a feel of, you know, Sinbad, basically. I'm kind of thinking of that for the Corlys show, that there's a little bit
Corlys would be that. I mean,
feel.
the Nymeria would be more, you know, Exodus / Battlestar Galactica feel, where they're fleeing all the time and finding strange places and they have to go again. But it'll be interesting to see if it goes anywhere. I think the other thing that I think people who are curious about it, who don't know much, is, I mean, it's the 10,000 ships is Nymeria and primarily women who are refugees, so this should be a fairly female-dominated cast. It would be interesting to see what factions they come up with. Nymeria is trying to hold these people together. There's probably people who have different opinions about where to go, what to do. And ultimately, when they arrive at Dorne, how they integrate or they don't would be a story all of its own.
And Corlys maybe just like one solo man traveling, like a Marco Polo, like a so it's a different type of story.
Yeah.
Okay, very interesting. So let's question. Well, last year, Javi Marcos had the initiative of create a podcast of rereading of Song of Ice and Fire. He gathered a team of wonderful people, and nowadays the podcast is a complete success. Berta, Santi, and Bea are part of this team, and they have a question for you.
Hola, ¿qué tal a todos? Somos Berta, Santi y Bea, que junto a Javi formamos la Canción Continúa, el primer podcast de relectura de Canción de Hielo y Fuego en español. Y bueno, solo queríamos, por supuesto, felicitar a Maglor por esos 100.000 y también por tener la oportunidad de poder hacer esta entrevista a Elio Linda, de lo cual estamos muy agradecidos de poder participar.
Exacto, nosotros pues queremos participar, como nos había dicho Maglor, con pues una pregunta para Elio y Linda. Vamos a ponerla primero pues en inglés y ya luego la diremos en español para que la entienda todos los demás. So guys, thank you for being here, and from the experience that you guys gained from working with George Martin, building the World of Ice and Fire book, have you guys planned to get involved in any other book about the world of Westeros, or any book about George Martin's worlds, or any other topic in general? Pues chicos, como le decíamos a Elio y a Linda, pues queríamos saber si frente a la experiencia que habían tenido ellos participando en la creación del libro del mundo de Hielo y Fuego, si ellos estaban pues en algún momento interesados en entrar a participar en algún otro libro sobre la historia de los mundos que lleva Martin, o sobre algún otro tipo de historia en general.
Exacto, muchas gracias por la atención, por estos invitados tan increíbles que ha traído aquí hoy Maglor. Y Maglor, de nuevo, felicidades por esos 100.000 suscriptores, que te mereces eso y muchísimo más por todo el trabajo que haces por esta comunidad. Así que muchísimas gracias a todos.
Y muchísimas felicidades, Dani.
¡Felicidades!
Yeah, you know, we would never turn down a chance to work on a book about the world and setting George created. About Westeros, about, you know, if it's Essos, and, you know, whatever he wanted, sure, we'd be happy to help. I think we've showed that we're able to do it, and that's great. If you mean about, I didn't quite follow the other part of the question about, is it, you want like stories, or if it was about a book about something other than Ice and Fire, something other than that world, like Wild Cards or Fever Dream or the Thousand Worlds. And yes, I mean, if George said, "Hey, help me write a guide to the Thousand Worlds," sure, we'd be first in line to say, yeah, we'd be happy to help with that. Wild Cards, I mean, I'm pretty sure there are people who are much more expert at Wild Cards, including some of the consortium who actually have written like RPG guides and so on. So I think he turned to them first, but if for some reason they weren't available and he said, oh, can you guys help with that? Yeah, we'd be willing to help with that.
And you never thought about writing your own book about other topic not related with any George works?
Well, we have doodled with it. We actually have an agent. So we'll see where that goes. It's
we
not
keep being distracted.
Yeah,
we keep being distracted.
I would say that that's a story of your life would be material for a book. Honestly, a guy from an American guy born from Cuban family that becomes in love thanks to an online role-playing game that becomes in love with a girl from Sweden and travels all the Atlantic Sea to stay with her, and just they are together due to the love of George R.R. Martin and his work. For me, it's the perfect story of a book.
Yeah, coming to a theater near you. Yeah.
Well, great. Well, the next question in Fire and Blood, well, the first part that was published, we are told about the first part of the story of the Targaryen dynasty from Aegon the Conqueror until the beginning of the reign of Aegon. In which historical moment do you think that Fire and Blood second volume will end?
Well, since George's intention is to have one more volume, that's what he said, that there'd be a second volume to finish it. We'd assume it'd be the death of Aerys and Robert's ascension. I know people said, looking at the link, that he only got this far, that surely he could do a third volume as well, and then it would end somewhere differently. I don't think that's right. I think George has lots of notes for some kings and not others, and I think some of the reigns will be written in a way that's fairly brief, like more like the way he covered 20-some years of Aegon the Conqueror in just 20-30 pages.
Yeah,
I think so. I don't think people are right about that. I do think he can absolutely do it in 2 volumes, but I do think that the second volume is not something he's going to start until he's done with the series, because I think Aerys, the rebellion, and all that is stuff that he wants to come out, the full details to come out first in the novels.
Yeah. There's always the risk with the length of it, as in if, again, he decides that. I think he decided with Jaehaerys that he needed more material for Jaehaerys because Jaehaerys ruled for so long, and he wanted to give a sense of what that long rule was like. We know he has a decent amount of material for Aegon IV. I think certainly that may be the longest part. Would you guess that Aegon IV might be a fairly
besides the rebellion? Yeah.
But then of course you've got the Blackfires.
Egg and Blackfires, of course.
But I think that one problem is that he may want to cover some of the story in the Tales of Duncan Egg instead of writing it in Fire and Blood.
Yeah, that's also a possibility as well. We know he has a lot of notes for that. He has story ideas. I know you have a question about that, so we won't go too much further. But it's possible that's one that he'd also want to some degree, or not. We'll see.
In Fire and Blood, we can read about the Dance of Dragons. What are your expectations about the TV show House of Dragon? What's the event you are waiting to see the most?
The duel above the God's Eye, or the dragon fight above the God's
Eye. That's
without question.
With Daemon leaping at Daemon from one dragon to another. That's just such an epic. It's like the most badass thing anyone's ever done in any of the work George has created. Expectations for the show. I have my attitude towards the show is different from my attitude towards what I had to Game of Thrones to some degree, in that Fire and Blood, the history, the account of a Dance of a Dragon, is not a novel. It's a fake history, as George calls it, which has a lot of gaps. It has a lot of things that they can fill in, and I may not care for choices, but it's like they'll have to make choices, and I don't know what choices I would make. So I think House of a Dragon, for me, I'm interested in it. I am certainly hopeful that it goes very well. I feel myself not particularly attached to it in the way I was initially attached to Game of Thrones, in the sense that I will watch it eagerly, and if it's good, great. If it's mediocre, fine. It was hard to feel okay about Game of Thrones feeling mediocre at times, for example, like because the books never did, for me anyway. So that, but for House of the Dragon, I think there's a lot more room for them to play around with it because it's not very detailed. It's a sketch of a story.
Yeah.
They now at the same time, there's lots of gaps for them to fill, but there are also details that are like kind of set. And whenever they decide to change those, I wonder, as fans tend to wonder about them.
Why?
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think that is that we don't have as detailed information about character motivations, the internal lives of the characters. We don't have the same sense of strong themes and I wouldn't say messages, but there's a certain feeling to the way, obviously, the story in Song of Ice and Fire goes for certain story arcs and certain characters, and you get the sense of what George is trying to do with these characters. This is very much about the broader historical picture and sort of highlighting certain exceptional individuals within the history, but it is not at all as personal and focused on the characters. So what they do with the characters in terms of how they decide to portray them is less important in what their attitude is like. And, there's not going to be a character where I can say, oh my God, Cersei would never say that. And Cersei would never do that. You feel like this actress or actor is just completely wrong. My concerns is that with this show is mostly about can they capture, because there's still a sense of what Westeros is like. If the House of the Dragons would turn out to have a plucky nurse like Talisa Westerling introduced, he would be every bit as annoying and wrong in House of the Dragon, because that sort of character does not fit Westeros. But for individual characters, you can't say, as long as they behave in a way that is reasonably Westerosi, then they can make various choices within that. But I hope they avoid things feeling too modern, for example. I want it to feel of this medieval inspired period. I want the feel that George in general has of the grittiness, of the realism mixed with the high fantasy to be there, so that it feels like something that could happen in Westeros, even if they change details around or fill in the gaps in a way that doesn't fit what I think would have happened.
Yeah, totally. Anachronisms are always dangerous, and trying to translate a modern discourse in a fantasy or say story, maybe sometimes, most of the time, it doesn't work very well at the end. Well, before we leave Fire and Blood, I am going to ask you a question full of mystery that I fear that it will never be answered unless they maybe do a TV show about this historical period of the Targaryen history. What do you think that happened with the Princess Aerea Targaryen? Did she really went to Valyria? And if you think so, how do you think that Euron Greyjoy survived such a dangerous trip if he traveled to Valyria? After the Forsaken, we think that Euron traveled to Valyria. But after seeing what happened with Aerea Targaryen, Valyria seems like a very dangerous place to go.
Well, I mean, we believe she was taken to Valyria. I think Septim Bar's speculation that Valyrian went home is right. As to Euron traveling to Valyria, I mean, did he? I'm with the reader on this one. I think
there's a lot of other places where he could pick up dangerous magic and dangerous knowledge that skirts the edges of Valyria.
Right.
But if Valyrian flew Aerea home to Valyria, then he flew right into the middle of where the 14 flames had exploded, and where probably this magic poisoning or whatever is going on is right next to Chernobyl. Basically, he flew over to Chernobyl and checked that out, and that was not good for her. So I don't think that certainly if Euron has been maybe close to Valyria, but I don't think he's been at the heart of it, for example.
I just say he may have access to the horn or the famous like Sauron-esque armor, maybe in another place.
Yes,
possible.
I think it's possible. There's some Valyria adjacent places out in the peninsula, where the monsters are supposed to be. So I think so. I think. On the other hand, that was the situation. I'm certain that was the situation as of A Feast for Crows. I admit, if you are someone who's paid attention to how George's story has grown and changed, the thought has entered my mind after reading the Forsaken chapter that maybe he decided to change some things. It's possible that he
changed the prophecy. May I interrupt you? He changed the prophecy that Daenerys received some quaith in A Dance with Dragons. First appears a crow, and then in the final version doesn't appear the crow, no? If I recall correctly.
No, yes, and I think there was supposed to be a kraken as well.
And a kraken, just a crow and kraken, and the final version is changed. Yeah.
Yeah, so he's changed some things around. So it's possible. I won't put it past that when he wrote A Feast for Crows, his intention was that Euron was a liar about a lot of things. It could be that as time went on, as he worked on A Dance with Dragons and started thinking about the Winds of Winter, Euron's role grew in his mind. I'm not certain. It's for another video entirely. The whole the evolution of the series. I have particular thoughts about how it's evolved. That are.
That's the book you want to write someday.
Yes, I'd love to. That's something I'd be happy to do someday, actually.
A story grows in the telling, and the meta story of how George R.R. Martin has been writing A Song of Ice and Fire, it would be really interesting, I think.
Anyway, HBO Euron Greyjoy is not our Euron Greyjoy, yeah? It's very, very different.
Very different character. Very different character.
Okay. So next question. Another of the projects the readers are eagerly awaiting of is the fourth tale of the Tales of Dunk and Egg. Our friend Kai has a YouTube channel where he talks about the Tolkien's Middle-earth, Harry Potter and other fantastic sagas. We have invited him to be part of this interview and he sent you this question.
Hola Maglor, soy Kai47. En primer lugar te quiero agradecer la oportunidad de hacerles una pregunta a Elio y Linda sobre el mundo de Canción de Hielo y Fuego, porque es una oportunidad maravillosa. Y en este caso mi pregunta es sobre el personaje de Ser Duncan el Alto, dado que, como todos sabemos, Duncan el Alto tiene tres historietas en El Caballero de los Siete Reinos. Pero desde la última historieta de estas tres hasta su muerte en la tragedia del refugio estival pasan un montón de cosas de las cuales no tenemos ninguna o prácticamente ninguna información, y sí sabemos que Duncan cambia mucho, que le pasan muchísimas cosas, pasa a ser de un caballero errante, como es en estas historietas de los Caballeros de los Siete Reinos, a ser el Lord Comandante de la Guardia Real, venciendo duelos importantísimos. Así que bueno, mi pregunta es ¿hasta qué punto Martin tiene planeados los distintos cuentos que tiene que haber de Duncan el Alto? O sea, si sabe cuántos tiene que haber de aparte de los tres que hay hasta donde quiera terminar, hasta su muerte o hasta que entre en la Guardia Real, y si los tiene ya esbozados, si sabe qué es lo que más o menos debería ocurrir en cada uno de ellos, o si es más bien algo que improvisará sobre la marcha, pero en cualquier caso si es algo que él tiene pensado hacer en un futuro, que yo entiendo que sí, pero vaya, no sé, a lo mejor la respuesta es simplemente que no pretende hacer ninguno más aparte de estos tres que ya ha publicado. Y esto sería todo, esta es mi pregunta, así que muchísimas gracias de nuevo por la oportunidad y un saludo de mi parte a Elio y Linda.
George absolutely does. So George does have the intention now of writing more stories. He has one partially written, but he's just not happy with it yet. And maybe he'll finish it after The Winds of Winter, I don't know, but I think he's spoken as a number of like 9 to 12 stories, something like that.
Every time he says a different number. Every time.
Yeah, it's clear, but it's nebulous. He's got, like, we know he has a file folder with notes about the events that happened in this period, because we one of the conference calls we had with him when we were working on the World of Fire was just going over what he could share with us about what happens in the Duncan Egg stories and Aegon's reign for the World of Fire. And then, as you probably know, a story where he would tell us things about, oh, you can't put that in. That's for this. You can't put that in. And then we wrote it, we sent it to him, and then he put all those things back into it that we had taken out because he said he couldn't have it. So
not all of them.
Not all of them, but a lot of them. There are some things he didn't.
There were some things he didn't even tell us. He just said, "Ooh, I'm not going to tell you that."
Exactly. So my view, long ago at the Glasgow World Con in 2004, 5, 6, 2, I want
4 of that. Right?
4,
yes.
I think. We were fans of chatting with him, and I was with him. He was having breakfast, and I proposed to him that, because people noticed, all the Duncan Egg stories were the 2 that he had published then were The Hedged Knight, Just One Sword, so they would be titles of roles that Dunk would have. So there'd be a Lord, there'd be a Kingsguard, there'd be a Lord Commander, and maybe a Master at Arms, stuff like that. And then I said, but the last one has to be different, right? The last one just has to be Summerhall. And he kind of looked at me and smiled that little smile of his, and didn't say anything. So I think George's idea is the ultimate end of it is the Summerhall. But yeah.
Of course, now that there seems to be some talk about Duncan Egg possibly being one of the projects, right?
Yes.
We've speculated that could it be, because from what everyone understood, George was initially saying no to adapting Duncan Egg.
Exactly.
Since he hadn't finished writing it and he didn't want to start yet another unfinished thing. Could it be that he's actually decided that he's not going to have time to write them as stories, but will write them as scripts for TV instead? It's possible. It's possible.
Yes, I mean, I know this kind of rolls into the next question that you had, but it's such a natural flow, so let's just go with it. It's easy to see why, with A Song of Ice and Fire, a novel series is very intricate and big. It hurts to see it adapted in a way that surpasses him, but because it can't capture everything he planned. Deliberately, they cannot do everything he planned to do with it. A series of novellas, because if each novella is contained, those are extremely adaptable, right? So he could have. I haven't had no conversations with George about it, but I could see him saying, why am I stuck on having these be novellas just because they started as novellas? I could write scripts, I could write plot outlines, I could insist that I have final approval over the script, and I could have them actually finish the story on the screen and say, look, this is what I intended, more or less. I mean, and why not? I think that would work very well. Possibly. I mean, that's my view of it. I don't think George needs to be wedded to the idea that the novellas have to be written before they're adapted, or I think he just has to feel like the genesis, the seed of them was his, and that he has a big role in how they are translated, but he doesn't necessarily have to actually do the writing himself. But that's my view on that one.
I totally agree, because George was a scriptwriter in Hollywood before, and he always said that when he wrote like one episode of a Game of Thrones, the TV show, in like 1 month. So it could take maybe 1 month to write almost the whole script, or most of the script of 1 or 2, 3 episodes of one story of Duncan Egg for the TV show. So it wouldn't take him so much time. He would really like that format. And as you said, it would be a different format than what he originally intended, but it could be also very nice. And of course, I am sure he won't be maybe the showrunner of the TV show, but someone that he trusts, a writer that he likes. I don't know, Daniel Abram, for example. Daniel Abram could be like the showrunner of this Duncan Egg TV show, and he just follows George's instruction, and George writes a bit, and Daniel Abram completes the story, something like that, maybe. I don't know, just guessing.
That is my favorite question. What do you think that happened at Summerhall?
I would say that we're feeling pretty confident, again, not having any additional information, that Egg try to use a magic ritual of some kind to restore the dragons, that he had felt that was necessary for the Targaryen rule to be strong enough to not have to be tyrannical, for example, that you needed the backing of the dragons. And it backfired. I mean, there was a dragon born, but...
Cool. Dragon.
Yes, but obviously at a very high price, as magic does tend to have a price whenever George gets involved with it. So that it worked in a sense, but not quite as he had expected, and certainly I don't think he expected the terrible outcome that it was either.
Do you think he will include that information in the next tales of?
You say maybe the last Duncan Egg story should be, as you said,
yes,
should be
in the last.
Summerhall, no?
I think it's the last one. The last one. Tales of Duncan Egg is the Summerhall, like you. I think it's the point. It's the start point to connect the real story with the A Song of Ice and Fire.
Yeah.
And if you think so if we have this information in the last book of Tales of Duncan Egg, do you prefer a point of view like Duncan, for example, to know this story, or do you prefer maybe a story in Fire and Blood, for example, with that Maester?
I understand. I
think I would like to see it first from the sort of more personal point of view of Duncan, for example.
Yeah.
I mean, and then because Fire and Blood will be the historical account, it will not have the same emotional depth.
Right.
But you know that George can make it work either way, even if you get the drier historical account first, and then you get the personal point of view. It will work that way too, because he can always give you those insights and character moments that are so important, even when you know the bare facts. I think, I'm not sure what is likeliest. I said it would depend on what the Duncan Egg project is like. I think whether it is likely to come out there or whether he will get to it first in Fire and Blood.
Yeah, totally. I agree with you. Both ways could be nice, but of course I think that really need a Dunk point of view, like fighting against some, I don't know, crazy magician son esos that wants to burn the whole family because you need a blood sacrifice in order to transform an egg into a dragon, something like that. Could be really make for amazing drama and terror. And George is a genius mixing fantasy, drama, and terror, so it would be very, very nice. Well, now next question. Now we move to A Song of Ice and Fire. Due to obvious reasons, we won't ask about the future of the Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring or whatever. So let's talk about A Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons. And in both books, there were some interesting plots that are waiting for a conclusion in The Winds of Winter. For example, in the Citadel, in Meereen, the Battle at the Storm Ends. What is your favorite plot that was unresolved at the end of A Feast of Crows and A Dance with Dragons? Your favorite plot that you want to read the most about it in The Winds of
Winter? The Dany's plotline, I definitely, where that one ends is just so it's such a cliffhanger in a sense, and it's such a change, and not a change in a good way either. I mean, this is where we're going to see her moving towards fire and blood and becoming that weapon that she needs to be, and the conqueror, and so it's going to be a dark turn. Eventually, maybe triumphant initially and then darkening, but I just have to see what that is going.
For me, I admit Dorne. I love the Dorner side of a story, so I'm really intrigued by.
I could only pick one, but yes,
yes. So between us, we got the two.
Yeah.
So the Dorner side, I mean, Arion, Doran, Oreo Hota, the Sand Snake, Starkstar. Be very interesting to read in the Winds of Winter where that goes. Especially in light. I mean, I stopped at the end of the 5th season, but
it's not going to be anything like that.
Yeah.
I promise.
Not at all.
No, when I learned how
I perfectly remember that when I was with you in Barcelona in Eurocon, I called that plot a travesty, and I remember the people in the place clapping to calling that name because it was horrible. It was horrible.
Yeah. What a shame. But it'll be better in George's book. So
it's not difficult. It's not difficult. That it will be better.
A blind monkey could do that.
Okay, so talking about Dany and Mirin complex plots in Dance with Dragon, in your opinion, which difficulties do you think George have to face to continue that story, and how has that affected the writing of The Wind of Winter?
Well, it's become a very big, very intricate series. George thought it was a trilogy, then it was 4 books, then it was 6 books, and for a long time it was 6 books, and then it was 7 books. For a long time it's been 7 books, and hopefully it'll stay 7 books, but who knows? I think it's just I think that part of it, that who knows if it'll be 7 or not. I think George is focused a lot on trying to end the 6th novel in a way that it's realistic to just finish with a 7th novel and finish in a good way. He's not going to skimp the quality of the book to try and just say, we saw what happened with the TV show. They decided they wanted to finish at a certain point, but felt a bit fast, and it hurt the legacy of that show. George has talked about this is his legacy. This is his magnum opus. He wants to do right by it. He doesn't want to be a Lost. He doesn't want to be a Game of Thrones. He wants it to be everything he's intended it to be. So, but that puts a lot of pressure, and it makes it very difficult, I think, for him to move quickly, because he's constantly trying to thread the needle, I guess is the way to put it, of trying to balance conciseness of story with the quality of a story.
When the story was expanding, as it was in Game of Thrones, Clash of Kings, and Storm of Swords, and by expanding I don't just mean the number of story threads, but the fact that the people were moving out away from each other.
Yes.
That was much easier because they didn't have to be synced up in the same way. We saw that the Meereenese Knot was largely about getting people to arrive in the right sequence on the right time. They did not have any jetpacks, so he had to make it work anyway. And that was a big part of the complexity. I think perhaps that the major complexities, certainly of Dany's storyline, may have been dealt with that, and Dany coming to this realization of what she needs to do. But he probably has other people now that need to be synced up. He needs Dany's arrival in Westeros to be synced up. He needs everything happening with young Griff in Westeros to be synced up. He needs Dorne and the North and so it's this whole implosion of things where he's pulling everyone closer together, and they actually have to be in the same time-space continuum, so it fits together, and nobody can go through the book and say, well, where did he find a jetpack to get there so quickly? and it doesn't mesh up, and this character couldn't be here, and this event happened in the wrong order, or it's juggling a lot of flaming balls.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's a huge issue, but we all trust George. That he's taking his time because, as you said, he wants to do it like in the perfect way. Totally. Well, we are going to talk now about a character we have talked in the past in the video, that it's Euron Greyjoy. In A Feast for Crows, Euron presents a dragon horn, that was able to subdue the dragons, or at least is what he says. And in A Dance with Dragons, we saw that the Daenerys Targaryen is able to tame and to mount on dragon. So our friend Evil Smile, who has done a lot of videos about the TV show Game of Thrones, about the Song of Ice and Fire, about Vikings, and other lots of fantasy books, has a very interesting question about exactly the Valyrian blood, the Valyrian steel, and the dragons, and how are they connected.
Muy buenas, Elio, Linda. Mi nombre es Antonio. Tengo un canal llamado Evil Smile donde subo básicamente sobre Canción de Hielo y Fuego, vikingos y entre otras cosas. Y tengo una pregunta específica para ustedes. Muchas gracias lo primero por contestarlo. La pregunta es la siguiente. ¿Cómo hicieron exactamente los valirios para domar a los dragones? Se habla de la magia de sangre, ¿no? Como un elemento fundamental, porque no veo a los valirios yendo a darle un poquito de comida a los dragones todos los días para domarlos, sino veo que hay un elemento mágico que hace que la, importancia de la sangre valiria sea increíble a lo largo de lo que hemos visto en Juego de Tronos y demás, donde el hecho de tener sangre valiria corriendo por tus venas es el factor determinante para que tú puedas domar a un dragón. Entonces, ¿cómo lo hicieron exactamente? ¿Utilizaron magia de sangre? ¿Está conectada con la forma de crear el acero valirio? ¿O es uno de esos grandes misterios que hemos visto a lo largo del mundo de Hielo y Fuego en el que no se pueden explicar? Muchas gracias.
Okay.
I mean, from the start, we've had the claim that the Targaryens and the Valyrians, who were dragon lords, in fact, literally have blood of the dragons. Whether they were able to do some kind of genetic, magic genetic mergers to give this connection to them. Whether there were, I mean, there's also the fact that maybe the was it the wyverns that lived in the caves, or
yes, the fireworms, yes,
that those were somehow the basis for the dragons.
Maybe with wyverns crossing.
So that they created a new species. And did they put dragon genes in them, or did they put a bit of
that's
genes in the dragon?
That's very weird.
Obviously, magically, very, very high in magic.
It sounds strange, but I mean, George has played with the idea of in science fiction work, the tough voyaging, of recombining and creating creatures of genetic material. So if someone, he talks about how the fire mages could sculpt stone. What if they could sculpt flesh and blood and create new life, basically? That's our speculation. I need to. We haven't really talked to George about this. It's just our speculation, but we do think. Well, when they talk the blood of the dragon, I think we should read it literally. That there is some dragon blood in Valyrians, or there's some Valyrian blood in dragons, and that creates a connection.
I mean, let's not forget about the deformed Targaryen children that are
exactly. I was going to talk about that, because Daenerys and Rhaenyra had dragon children. That's crazy.
Yes, and also just thinking back to the question earlier with Aerea in Valyria, when her skin is kind of boiling and opening, doesn't it look like scales underneath?
Yes. It's like
the exposure to the magic from Valyria gone wild, in fact, starting to bring out her genes more. Is she turning? Actually, did her body start the process of becoming half dragon in a way? Because she got too high of too concentrated a dose of magic.
In the World of Ice and Fire, there was some folk around that were like lizard men or lizard women. Do you recall that? I don't know in what way. So maybe Valyrians are distant cousins of them. Maybe, I don't know.
This in the Thousand Islands, I believe it was called. They have.
They have some early experiments that didn't work out in making.
and they just left the horrible.
They ran away, and sort of it's like Jurassic Park.
Yeah, totally. Maybe. Oh.
Okay,
But you really approve the idea that there is a dragon blood magic, and that's the key. Actually,
I think so.
Yes.
Blood magic or fire magic?
I think so. I think George say maybe you know more about the Valyrian blood in the next books. So we are waiting for.
Well, I know what he said is that more about how it actually works with Valyrians controlling dragons, why some people can, why some people are dragon lords and others aren't, and how. I mean, it's clear it's a hereditary thing of some kind, but it doesn't necessarily pass to everyone within a family either.
Just like regular genetics.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to speak. We're going to talk about another, maybe Valyrian child or not. We don't know. Talking about the future of the saga, one of the biggest mysteries is whether Jon Grief truly as Aegon Targaryen or not. If it's possible that you know data about his story that you can't share with us, but when you read his story for first time, with which theory do you agree the most? Is the son of Rhaegar or a Blackfire?
Well, from the first time George read the chapter that kind of introduced Tyrion to Griff's company of men, and we had this conversation, but I think George ended up cutting in the actual final version. I recall reacting very strongly, like, oh, Illyrio has a pretender that he's sending. That's the big plan. So our view, and this is again our just view of it, young Griff, Aegon, is actually the son of Illyrio Mopatis by his Lyseni wife Sarah. I'm not convinced. I'm not certain as to whether it's necessary that either or both of them are somehow connected to the Targaryens, either they're Blackfire descendants or Aryan Bright Flames descendants. I don't think that's even necessary to matter, because the whole point of Aegon is that Varys has a theory that being a king, being a good king, is a matter of being raised to be a good king. But it's not in the blood, but it's actually in the environment that you're brought up in. So he sees he is Aegon. Because all his life he's been told he's Aegon. He's been raised to be Aegon. So he's not counterfeit. I mean, if someone came out with the actual Aegon, he'd say, well, there's no difference between them. They're both Aegon. So that's my view. I don't know if he's a Blackfire. I don't know.
But he's not Rhaegar's son. He is Aegon.
Yeah, absolutely, he's not Rhaegar's son. Yeah, I believe he's absolutely not Rhaegar's son. He's Illyrio's son.
We agree.
The boy's clothing that Tyrion is given, that was his. I'm certain of that.
And certainly the inclusion of the statue.
The statue of Jon Illyrio.
Yeah.
And as you were saying, I think that the structure was changed between the first time that George read the chapter and the finished chapter. I think in the first chapter they were talking about the sword. The sword, and why that is talking about the sword. So maybe they had Blackfire, but George thought it was too obvious, so they just took it from the text, so people wouldn't theorize that, but we theorize in any case. So poor George.
Well, I think he knew that people would pick up something, but he didn't want it to be too obvious.
But at the end, we are two geeks, two nerdy, so we continue to discuss these things. Okay, well, we have to talk about Aegon, of Jon Grief. Is one of those characters that we readers never finally watch in the TV show in Game of Thrones. If you could choose 5 characters, this is difficult, only 5 characters of the books that you would have liked to see on the HBO TV show, who they be and why? And you can say like Euron or Daenerys or Cersei, because they were bad adapted. We are saying about actual characters that didn't appear on Game of Thrones.
But, I mean, if we all agree that young Griff should have been in, but so we won't count him, but he's definitely would be one. But the 5, I'll start with. So like the Iron Islands, Victarion and Aeron Damphair, like those 2, because then hopefully that would make Euron proper, like he would have foils to respond to. His story would work better.
It wouldn't be a cartoon pirate.
Like a bad version of Jack Sparrow. And an honorable mention has to go to Asha
because there was no
Oh,
Asha in the show.
There's no Asha in Invierno.
No,
I mean-
you're right. There was a Jara, not an Asa. You're totally right.
Exactly. There was not an Asha. And Dorn, of course, we're going to be missing characters from Dorn, and other than the ones that were there but not. But Ariane, Martell, and Geraldine, Darkstar.
Wow. Yeah.
Quentin as well, to be honest. That's I shouldn't have mentioned, but I love the Dragon Team or chapter.
Yeah,
in
I mean,
Death
just
Dragon.
to have more characters to actually do the actual plot, as opposed to inventing
It
something
would have been
else.
great to have that dilemma for Daenerys as well. Just the and finally a proper the actual fifth character, Lady Stoneheart.
Oh. Yeah.
That's the one George wishes was there. Like every time.
We're not gonna disagree with George on that one.
Oh yeah.
Okay. So, sadly, it's the last question. Many times you would say that George hadn't told you had not told you the end of the saga. We saw an end in the TV show and the end of the Game of Thrones. There is a lot of unease in the fandom of A Song of Ice and Fire because many fear a similar end for plots such as Daenerys or Bran Stark. You know, and you who know better than anybody the work of George and his way of writing, what would you say to that part of the fandom that feared that maybe the end in the books will be as disappointing as the end at the TV show?
Well, I mean, the way it was executed in the TV show was absolutely 100% a problem of the constraints of television, the decision that it were only going to be 8 seasons. I mean, even though HBO and George said that more were warranted, even though there are going to be things that are more or less the same. I mean, George has recently, again reiterated that, they went in a different direction with some of the things. I'm sticking with what I have planned. The darker turn for Daenerys, it's going to be there, but it's going to make sense. It's not just going to flip like this because she heard some bells.
Not just the bell, not just the bell.
Yeah, no, it's she's not a Cylon that's programmed to go nuts at a specific sound and start massacring people. So it's going to make sense. And then, yes, initially we were saying that we didn't think that Bran on the Iron Throne was the actual ending. It seems that some version of that is correct, but again, there are ways where it could be Bran and yet not Bran, for example, because we know that Bran can be in other bodies, for example. I'm still thinking it is likelier that Bran's body stays where it is. It seems very difficult to get that on the move, to be honest. So I think it's all going to be down to how it is done, how the characters, how their choices make sense, how their characters develop to satisfying conclusions, to character arcs. And that is what, I mean, to some extent, yes, that is what George is struggling with. But he knows very well that it has to take a certain amount of time. It has to take a certain amount of pages for you to be on board with these changes. I mean, nobody looking at the books now feels that Jaime being introduced as a point of view and sort of partially redeemed is strange or out of character in any way. So why should a turnabout in Daenerys, for example, be something that George couldn't carry off well? Of course he can. We know he can. So I think it's just a matter of the fact that it is complicated. It's complicated both on the character level and the plot level, but rushing through it was definitely not a good choice.
Okay. Javi, ¿quieres preguntar algo? Last question for
No, it was amazing. Elio hasn't seen the last TV show, the last seasons of the TV show, so I guess that's why he doesn't answer the question.
Do you see anything from the last season?
I stopped at the end of the 5th season. I have seen bits and pieces when like Linda brought up to my attention something cool or something terrible.
Usually
something terrible. I know what's happened, but I know the reactions people had to the final season. I know Linda's reactions to the final season. To me, end of the day, as if like Benioff and Weiss wanted to finish when they did, I've told people again and again, I have some sympathy for them in the sense that I was being told by people who knew them 3rd, 4th season, they were exhausted. They were putting so much of themselves into it. I think they were putting too much of themselves into it. I think part of the reason the show declined in quality was because they didn't bring in enough writers. They didn't bring enough outside point of view. They tried to do too much themselves, and they tried to finish the show themselves because of ego or a belief that they were the only ones who could do it. I think they could have easily have stepped back, allowed Brian Cogman and some other people to become showrunner, and let them take it to season 10. I think everyone would have been happier. Their legacy would have been happier. HBO would have been monetarily a lot happier.
Yes.
So
we might even have been a little happier.
We might have been a bit happier. So I think so I have sympathy. They were exhausted, but it led them to make a decision that for me was a decision for them and not a decision for the show. So that's all I can really say about that. I think George doesn't want that. He wants it to be done. I think he's working to make sure that the way he writes the book is for the story. It's for posterity, and it's not just for what conveniences him.
Totally. You know that I don't have the same strong opinions about the end of the show as you or Danny. That Danny also totally hates the end of the show in Linda levels of hate. Just to be honest. But of course it could be done far better. It was totally rushed, but we have a total trust in George. And as I always say, I think that the ending of the books will be similar in what happens, but not in how it happens. So maybe the end point of the characters, of course, if Tyrion is alive in the TV show, Tyrion will be alive at the end of A Song of Ice and Fire, but his arc road will be totally different. Like maybe the Sansa, maybe all the main characters will be totally different, but they will maybe end in the final same spot. But the beautiful thing of these stories is the road, not the actual destination.
Exactly.
So we will enjoy a far better road in the next books that George is going to
maybe the same and very different develop of the characters. That's the I think it's the brief, no? Okay, thank you, Linda. Thank you very much for this interview. It's amazing for me to have you here in Crónicas of Westeros. Muchas gracias a los dos. Han sido súper amables de haber aceptado esta entrevista. Espero que para vosotros, para la comunidad de fans, pues todos estamos esperando con muchas ganas y con mucha impaciencia ya Vientos de Invierno. Todos esperamos que pues estos ratitos de charla os ayuden como siempre a ir aguantando más la espera para que llegue ese gran momento que esperamos todos, que es la publicación de Vientos de Invierno, que llegará, seguro, que nadie lo dude, que algún día tendremos Vientos de Invierno. Hasta entonces, aquí estaremos todos para apoyar a la comunidad y seguir trayendo cositas. Gracias, Javi, gracias a Elio y Linda. Mencionar también a mi querida Natalie Flores, que ha estado aquí traduciendo todo para ayudarme un poquito con la entrevista, agradecerle a ella, y además es nuestra traductora oficial del canal, así que aprovecho este espacio para agradecerle que haga ese trabajo. Y sin más, pues despediros hasta el siguiente vídeo. Thank you, Javi, thank you, Linda, thank you, Elio.
Our pleasure, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Hasta el próximo vídeo, chicos.
Bye.
Adiós.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.